Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Verbo.
3 weeks from tonight, the returns will start to roll in, and the College Football Playoff Selection Committee will unveil its first official rankings, and we'll have a look at what the 12-team bracket might look like. The first year of 12 teams in the College Football Playoff, triple the size from the last 10 years. Glad to have you with us.
I didn't know we were doing this already, but
Reese Davis, Booger McFarland, Joey Galloway, and Greg McElroy with you. Now, we've tried to educate people throughout the offseason and early first half of this season as to exactly how the playoff will work. Just for a refresher course, the 5 highest-ranked conference champions will get automatic bids in the 12-team field. The 4 highest-ranked conference champions will get buys into the quarterfinals. Then 8 first-round teams play starting December 20th. Of course, among those at-large teams, there's all 7 at-large teams and 1 other conference champion. Then from there, first round on campus, quarterfinals, semifinals, national championship, all at neutral sites. January 20th will be the championship game. So 4 highest-ranked conference champions, regardless of where they're ranked overall, seeded 1 through 4. Important to remember the difference between ranking and seeding.
Yeah, that's the problem. So you're going to have like Miami ranked 6 or whatever right now, but they're going to be like 2 or 3.
Host first-round games, and even though you'll
unless
see,
they lose out or Clemson wins ACC
coming up, you'll see a team from the group of 5 that will be seeded 12th. That's not necessarily the case. If they're ranked higher than that, then they will fall in their ranking if they are seeded within the top 12. Confused yet? You don't have to be. Let's take a look at how the playoff bracket would look based on the current AP poll. So the last team in the field would be a conference champion and an automatic bid. Here's the example. Boise State, ranked 15th right now, would get the 12 seed because of the fact that they would be the champions of the Mountain West Conference, the highest ranked 5 conference champions, or the highest ranked among the group of 5 champions. At 11 would be an at-large berth for Tennessee. Tennessee falling a little bit in the AP poll, and you see that they would be at number 11.
The way it's going, Tennessee ain't going to be in this.
Seated just ahead of the Big Orange would be another team in orange, and it would be the Clemson Tigers. Clemson, of course, still without an ACC loss, but we project them here, Greg, because they are not the highest-ranked ACC team, but they would get an at-large berth.
Currently, yeah.
Reese, this will be one of the biggest question marks of the next 6 weeks. Does the ACC get 2 teams in? Right now, Clemson, we're dusting off some old terms. Game control, which is basically eye test, they are 7th. But you also have strength of record. That's your resume, they're 21st. So will the ACC get 2? In this case, they do, but will they at season's end? It'll be interesting to find out.
Clemson's getting slept on ever since the Georgia game. They've been really good.
Streak, Greg, among those 5 teams, the teams in ACC play that they've faced 3-11 in conference play. Also making the field, if we were using the AP poll, would be LSU at number 9. So 8 plays 9, and 9 would be on the road. And when we come to Selection Day, there's going to be some controversy about 8-9, because 8 gets a home game, 9 does not, and certainly that would upset plenty of people in LSU should they have to go to Tuscaloosa. But of course, these 2 teams play in early November, and some of this might sort itself out. So for practical purposes, it would be LSU versus Alabama in a first-round game. Now seated in the 7th spot and facing Clemson in a first-round game and hosting, it would be the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia, of course, with Texas this weekend, still an opportunity to win the SEC, but at the moment, ranked 5th, seeded 7th.
What do you all think of Georgia-Texas this week?
Bracket, the projected playoff bracket. At number 6, Ohio State, coming off that narrow loss to Oregon. And Ohio State would host Tennessee. Buckeyes ranked 4th.
I don't think Tennessee's going to be there, so it doesn't matter.
Product of conference champions getting automatic bids to 4 highest
Boise State at Penn State,
getting buys to the quarterfinals. And then facing Boise State and doing it in Happy Valley would be the Penn State Nittany Lions, Boog.
Yeah, Reese, how about Penn State, 6-0? They have a big win against USC. And if you look at their schedule going forward, no Michigan and only one ranked team left, and that's the Ohio State Buckeyes. So if you're James Franklin coming off that big win, you feel really good going forward, especially with
what are the buys?
Innovative Penn State offense led by Drew Allen.
How about that
Texas,
offense
Oregon,
up against Ashton Genty, who's leading the nation in rushing. Well,
Miami
over
and
200
who?
yards
The Big
per
12
game.
champion?
Maybe a Heisman Trophy winner for Boise State.
Iowa State.
Who knows? Okay, the fourth highest ranked conference champion and getting the 4th seed is Iowa State. Now, the Cyclones are 6-0 for the first time since 1938. They're only ranked 9th in the AP poll, but they are the 4th highest ranked projected conference champion. That would put them into the quarterfinals, into a neutral site, and with a bye. Just ahead of them, Miami. Couple of fortuitous breaks in replay.
I would love to
The
see Ohio
Hurricanes
State
remain
Miami
undefeated.
quarterfinal.
They, under this scenario, Joey, would get the 3 seed.
Oh my God, that'd be awesome. At the Orange Bowl too?
Yeah, fortuitous
Something
breaks
like that.
is a good way to put it, Reese. They had a close one against Virginia Tech and a close one against Cal. Then they hit their bye week, was just in time. So now you look at where Miami's at. They're 6-0, but they don't play the other 3 undefeated ACC teams. They're not on their schedule. When you look at Pitt, looks pretty good. SMU looks pretty good. Clemson, who was sitting at the 10 seed in this ranking, they look really good.
Yeah.
They're not on Miami's schedule. They have no ranked opponents left. All they have to do is run the rest of their schedule, and then they will be in the ACC championship game. So I like where they're sitting.
The other thing, though, is
I
if
like
Miami
where Cam
drops
Ward is
some
playing.
games,
Finally,
which they've been
Miami's found a way
surviving,
to win
they're probably not
football
going to get
games
in.
as opposed to losing them.
And
It would just be
to Greg's
Clemson.
point earlier, if Clemson, Miami were to keep winning, almost certainly it would get 2 ACC teams in. The winner of the game would get a bye almost certainly into the quarterfinals.
Yeah, if Miami's undefeated at
pretty
that point, then
apparent
sure,
who
yeah.
The top 2 seeds would be. Oregon would be the 2 seed, awaiting the winner of Clemson and Georgia. I think we would all take that. And then Texas, the number 1 seed under this scenario, because they're number 1 in the Associated Press poll, and they would await the winner of LSU and Alabama, neither of whom, by the way, are on the Longhorns' regular season schedule, but who knows what might happen by the time the SEC championship game rolls around. So all of this is just a projected look at the 12-team field. It's jarring, really, because for so many years when all of us were growing up,
there's a lot
first,
more to talk
the
about
pollsters
now,
voted
but-
for the national champion. Then we got a national championship game. Then we had semifinals and a 4-team playoff, and now we've expanded this thing all the way out to 12, Boog.
Well, this is really going to shock you guys. Boog still wishes there were 4. Now that I got that out of the way, I do think the 12-team playoff is coming at a good time. I think right now in college football, there is so much parity at the top. Just look at what just happened recently.
This year
Alabama
there is.
beats Georgia. Vanderbilt beats Alabama. At any one point in time, we've seen several teams look like they're the best. From Georgia to Alabama to Texas. I think there's so much parity at the top of college football. This 12-team playoff comes at the perfect time because once we get it, I don't think anybody knows who's going to win it. And I think that's really good for college football, even though I still wish there were 4.
Yeah, and Texas is de facto number 1, but they haven't played anybody yet. Like Oklahoma's kind of
I kind
down.
of agree with you, Boog. I like
Oregon
the 4
just played
also.
Ohio State.
Those were great arguments.
A lot of
Some
big games
those arguments
left.
have just gone away. Now it doesn't matter that Notre Dame lost at NIU. They still have a chance to get in the playoff. So some of these games that we would have been talking about early in this season so far would have been like, okay, that team's eliminated. They may be out of this thing. But now at this stage, with 12 teams getting in, everyone's still alive. I agree. We have a lot of good football teams. I don't see much separation between the top 8 teams. So it's going to be interesting. When you start to put up those matchups and think about maybe a Boise State playing a Penn State, how exciting is that in a playoff scenario? So when
And then
I
if
look at
the
it on
winner
this
of that
board,
would
which
go
Reese
to
just laid out,
neutral
man,
site,
it looks
Iowa
like it's
State.
going to be a lot of fun.
Crazy games.
And I think a lot of us were concerned about how this playoff would impact our reactions to regular season outcomes. And I've found this, guys, well, used to be kind of where you won, you get a lot of credit, you lost, you get destroyed. It's not really the case anymore. Like, how many people came out of the game last week having watched Ohio State and Oregon and said, yeah, you know what, I don't really like Ohio State anymore. That's not the case. What about when Bama played Georgia? A lot of people came out of it saying, man, Georgia played pretty good. They just ran out of time. So I think it's definitely impacted the way we evaluate teams. but the immediate and sudden reaction to a poor performance from your own team is still extremely strong. So I think the other thing, too, we're going to be watching here in November, who's peaking at the right time. That's something that we've never really worried about in the past, because if you've lost by now, you're dead.
Yeah.
Now it might be about teams that improve and are playing their best ball at the end of the year.
That's
one
the
of
argument for a playoff is it allows you to improve.
SportsCenter earlier tonight, who's in the best shape if they suffer their second loss this weekend? Is it Tennessee, Alabama, or Georgia? That's a conversation we never would have had.
Best? Who'd be in the best?
I'm
it'd be Georgia.
That you still like the 4, as upset as you were about the 4 last year on Selection Day. But I'll say this, if you don't like 12, wait till 14 comes, which it's going to at some point, and wait till 16 comes, because 16's coming, because at some point all of these schools that are getting buys into the quarterfinals are going, wait a minute, we want a home playoff game. I think sooner rather than later. What year that is, I don't know. But sooner or later, all of the first-round games will be on campus, because, Iowa State's going, I want to play a playoff game in Ames. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? So much more to talk about here, and still 3 weeks away from the unveiling of the rankings. And the guys have alluded to, it is really tight at the top. We bring in bracket expert and college football playoff reporter Heather Dinich to give us the very latest. And the SEC showdown, boy, everybody's just crowning Texas, aren't they? Poor old Georgia. They'll go down there and just try to get a first down this weekend.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Verbo Private Vacation Rentals. Relax, you booked a Verbo.
40 acres, and then wrap it up with the game on ABC Saturday night. Time for our Capital One rewarding performance based solely on the current AP poll. The SEC would land the most teams in this year's playoff with 5, led by top-ranked Texas. Oregon would lead a trio out of the Big Ten. Boise State not in the top 12, but the 5th highest-rated conference champions. And please, as always, remember at this stage, before the committee releases this ranking, and even before Selection Day, the purpose of our bracket is to illustrate, not to compete. So please, no wagering. Heather Dinich now joined us. She is our college football playoff expert, because there's always a risk when you start to wager. Heather Dinich is here. Heather, if you had to bet right now on Ohio State, what type of damage, if any, did that loss do? What impact did the loss to Oregon have for the Buckeyes in terms of the playoff selection committee?
Well, Reese, it put tremendous pressure on Ohio State to win at Penn State in November. Here's why. Obviously, Ohio State can and wants to win the Big Ten title. But if they don't, and they're competing for one of those at-large bids, if you're a 2-loss team, that's okay, but you still need statement wins. And if they don't beat Penn State, they better hope that Indiana and Michigan are still ranked by the committee on Selection Day, because that non-conference lineup for the Buckeyes, Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall, I promise you, it will go under the microscope in that committee meeting room.
It's one of the things, though, Heather, I've been staunch in this regard. I don't think that the committee should differentiate between conference and non-conference schedule. Just look at the schedule as a whole. The non-conference schedule factors into that. It'll drag you down if it's not good enough. I totally agree with your point. I think they'll still get in with 2 losses. If it's another close game to Penn State, could certainly impact their seeding and whether they get to host a first-round game, if that were to be the case. Texas and Oregon, I went back and forth on my AP ballot about which way to go. Initially, so overcome by that great game, I was going to go Ducks. Ended up sticking with Texas. How do you think the selection committee would look at it based on the way things are right now?
Reese, they're going to wrestle with it just like you did, because I know there are people in that committee meeting room who will look at Oregon and say they have the best resume in the country. That's reflected in ESPN's strength of record metric, where they're number 1. Texas is number 1 in ESPN's football power index, and about 30 points better than the average FBS team. But I think when the committee would cast their votes, if they met today, Texas would get the nod for that number 1 spot, because they have the best combination of resume and eye test. When you look at their quarterback room, no one else in the country can beat it, and they proved that again in their win against the
Yeah, we'll
Sooners.
see this week if they beat Georgia. I think I'm going to pick Georgia.
Alabama-Georgia game. Alabama really hasn't looked anything like a playoff team, but they have that win against Georgia. How much head-to-head can't be everything. How much does it weigh in terms of evaluating those two right now?
You're right. It's not everything, but it is a tiebreaker in their protocol. So,
right.
Ward Manuel, Michigan's athletic director, the committee chair, would advise them, look down, remember your protocol. If the teams are comparable, that's one thing you have to consider. Alabama's a complex character because it has one words. They can ignore that head-to-head result, but I would be surprised
That'd be very
if
subjective.
Alabama dropped further than Clemson because they also compare common opponents. Clemson and Georgia played. Alabama and Georgia played. We know the difference in those two results. So maybe you see Miami ahead of Alabama, but I don't think they drop much further than 6 or 7, and the AP poll has that reflected right.
By the time we get the first rankings, at least some of this will sort itself out. Alabama with a game at Tennessee this weekend, and then later on in November a game at LSU, which certainly could have an impact on the way the committee stacks things up. Heather, great job as always. Look forward to talking with you as we lead up to 3 weeks from tonight when the first selection committee rankings are unveiled. That is the great Heather Dinich. Let's take a look at today's road test presented by Goodyear. Georgia and Texas this weekend. Dogs have played an AP #1 8 times, never on the road. That'll change this weekend. Dogs become the first team playing a couple of top 5 road matchups since Florida did it with Spurrier in '96. As you remember, Georgia lost late
I hate Georgia. I'd
Alabama
love to see Texas win, but my brain just tells me to pick Georgia. They haven't lost to anybody in the regular season other than Bama since Kyle Trask in 2020. Like, they just don't lose. 2 losses in the same season would be crazy.
Since the offseason. Greg, what decides it?
But Texas can definitely beat
simple,
them.
Reese. It's the SEC,
Losing Todd
so
Monken has
line
shown
of
up for Georgia.
And then weapons, in that order. First thing you got to assess is, can Texas block them? Because we know that Georgia's got elite skill, really, really good players on the perimeter of their defense that can create issues, like Jalen Walker. That's the big question. I actually think Texas is going to fare pretty well right there. I love their O-line. I think they got a lot of experience and a lot of talent up front protecting Quinn Ewers. Then I look on the outside and I wonder if at this point, are the Longhorns capable of beating a secondary that's been pretty average by Georgia standards? And I think the answer is yes. So guys, I look at this matchup and I'm actually leaning pretty heavily in favor of Texas at the moment. I think Georgia's going to have a remarkably good performance from their quarterback. And frankly, I haven't seen that from Carson Beck up at this point of the season.
Hey, I'll be wearing a Texas shirt that day. I hope he's right.
Yeah, Greg, for me, I'm going to look at the quarterbacks. Leave it to you to look at the big guys and me go to the quarterbacks. But I want to see, can Carson Beck show up in a big-time matchup? I think we both would agree Quinn Ewers is the better quarterback. He's played the best so far. Carson Beck, the first half against Alabama, or Carson Beck, the second half against Alabama? Which Carson Beck are we going to see? Because I think the line of scrimmage is going to go back and forth all night long. But which quarterback can make those key plays? Which quarterback can limit the turnovers? Which quarterback can show that they can command a team and make plays for 4 quarters? I think it's going to go a long way to winning this football game.
I always look at the SEC and think, what physical games have you had leading up to your big game? Georgia's had a couple physical football games. They've played Kentucky. They've played Alabama. When you look at Texas's schedule, they played Michigan early in the season when Michigan still thought they could throw the ball a little bit. So there was no physical matchup there. Oklahoma wasn't very physical. And so I would assume that Texas is a more fresh team. Now in the back half for Texas, they do have Kentucky after Georgia, and Vandy's back there. It's interesting to say Vandy because now that's an interesting team. And also Texas A&M on that schedule. So their back half
brings up Vandy, but doesn't bring up Billy Napier.
Fresh on Saturday for this game.
All right, Joey.
I think it's going to be Texas because they just haven't had one of those games that beat you
Vandy
up
is pretty good, though.
So they'll be more fresh than what Georgia will come in with.
One thing I noticed about this game, Texas and its defense in their Power 4 games against Power 4 opponents, they've faced a former walk-on quarterback making his second career start and 2 true freshmen. The best pass offense that Texas has faced all season long is UTSA. Here comes Carson Beck. Poor old Georgia. I know you guys are just hoping the Dogs can find a way to get a first down. I don't know. I mean, they just won 2 national championships in the last few years. I don't know.
They aren't the same, but they definitely. I need to see them lose this game for me to believe it. So I'll be picking Georgia, I think. But
College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Verbo.
And then we'll be there for the entire thing, starting with College Game Day. College football rankings brought to you by Verbo. Remember, this is the AP.
I saw a thing today that was like first time that the top 3 hasn't had. It was like Bama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, and somebody else in a long time.
On these, Army and Navy both ranked for
so Texas, Oregon, Penn State, cool to see. Penn State probably not going to stay there, but they can. If they beat Ohio State, they definitely will be.
So there are some high leverage games coming up this weekend in the top 25. Let's take a look at some of these games and look at the numbers from
That's probably what I love most is you have just more games matter longer at the with this 12-team format.
Joey, a team I know that you're watching is Iowa State. They've got UCF. If they win, their chances jump to 61%, lose, and they fall all the way to 27. What do you think about the Cyclones?
They ain't losing to UCF.
Yeah, the Big 12 is all the way upside down from what a lot of people expected it to be. Texas Tech, BYU, and Iowa State now undefeated in the Big 12. A lot of people thinking Iowa State's the favorite to win it. They have no ranked opponents until the last game when they played Kansas State that's ranked 17. So the Big 12 is going to be a lot of fun to watch.
All right, Boog, I'll walk through Alabama, Tennessee. What are you thinking about them as I show you the numbers here?
Nico is kind of bad, and so Bama should win. Heupel don't trust his quarterback. We've seen it 3 times.
A third loss for one of these teams, and I think there's not going to be a 3-loss team in the playoffs. So this could be a playoff eliminator, quiet as it's kept.
Greg, same thing. How about Tennessee?
Yeah, Tennessee wins this week. They really have one massive hurdle left, and that's Georgia. So a 10-2 team out of the SEC looking pretty good, I would imagine. So a big one here potentially for the Vols.
It's a big one for both of them for sure. Tennessee has opportunities. Alabama still has to go to LSU.
Yep.
The All-State Playoff Predictor will show you how all of these things go.
I wish I had this.
Coming up, Wild and Blue.
Anyway, we'll be back here every Tuesday, so come hang out.